Audio check.
Potentially, yeah, I have no idea what. Oh, yeah, so scheduling conference, I mean, all the parties are just like. Are you gonna get the round table? Yeah. Sure. So I didn't try that stuff. I will see that. Yeah, Chris, I just find here.
Make a turn, man. We'll do that, go here. I never get to sit at this table, so let's just sit at this table. Cause it doesn't matter. It's like a new location. Hello, how's it going, Cheryl? Nice to see you as well. Ready. Round table.
I'm so excited.
He wants to move down. That's what I mean, figured you guys. There's no.
Also, I don't know if there are any mics.
Oh, yeah, there are.
Good morning and welcome to the Public Utilities Regulatory Authority. My name is Tom Wheel. I'm the interim chairman here. I'm joined today by my spectacular colleagues, Vice Chairman David Arconti, interim commissioners Jan Beecher, Holly Cheeseman, and Everett Smith. We are here today for docket number 25-1213, application of the Connecticut Light and Power Company, DBA Eversource Energy, for an order to securitize 2018 through 2023 catastrophic storm costs. We got to work on shortening these docket titles. The panel has designated me presiding officer in this docket as reflected by the vote recorded in the minutes of the January 14th, 2026 regular meeting. I'm going to start by just noting that I issued correspondence in this docket on January 2nd, disclosing my involvement in docket 240330 in my capacity as legal and regulatory director of OECC. And as explained in that letter, I don't believe I'm compelled to recuse myself from this separate proceeding because it is not the same proceeding I actively participated in, and I do feel that I can impartially and fairly evaluate the issues in this proceeding. But before we move forward, I just did want to pause to allow the opportunity for anyone to object to my membership on the panel or my designation as presiding officer. And we could also take a recess if people want to talk about that without me watching you. So I'll just pause. And hearing no, okay. Sounds like we're good. Oh.
Yeah. Good morning, Chair Wheel. I was just going to confirm no confirms from the Office of Consumer Counsel with your participation in the matter.
Okay, thank you. And of course, as all the lawyers know, anyone can object at any time to bias moving forward. This isn't anyone's opportunity. This isn't anyone's only opportunity. Okay, so we are here today for a scheduling conference. We do have an agenda in front of us. I did want to start by explaining our rationale for holding this conference. The commissioners reviewed and granted motion number 1 in this proceeding, which was Eversource's request to open a contested proceeding and evaluate the evidence from docket 240330 in this docket. So one of the issues we do want to discuss with all parties and interveners today, in addition to scheduling, is the scope of what evidence should be kind of pulled from that docket into this one. But Eversource also filed motion number 2, which asked PURA to adopt a specific schedule for this contested proceeding. And rather than granting that motion and adopting the schedule in the motion, we commissioners decided to hold this scheduling conference. And the reason for that is we just want to make sure we clearly communicate the situation we are currently in with respect to scheduling and PURA's general capacity. I don't have a really long history with PURA proceedings, but I've been in some periods of high activity, like I was here for the grid mod rodeo in 17-1203 and the 11 reopeners. I don't know if this agency's active docket caseload has ever been more overloaded than it is right now. I've kind of lost count, but I think between reconsiderations, remands, pending filings, we have something like 5 or 6, depending on how you classify them, distribution rate cases before us at the moment. We also have some substantial change of control dockets, both pending and on remand. We have pending motions for reconsideration in other dockets, other major proceedings that have been open for a long time and are still being actively worked on by staff and commissioners. And that's in addition to the dozens and dozens of proceedings that have nothing to do with the public service companies, but are nonetheless managed primarily by Attorney Lopez and his dedicated crew at EOE. And all the other annual dockets that are currently open. So we do have staff and commissioners who are working nights and weekends right now on what's before us. So we did, but we just wanted to kind of openly and clearly communicate that to Eversource primarily and all other parties, that the proposed timeline in the original motion, which I acknowledge, having seen a preview of sort of what we're going to talk about today, I think already sort of isn't the current ask. But that initial timeline, when we saw that motion, that just was not possible for us, but we wanted to make sure that the company understands this isn't about us intentionally trying to avoid addressing this issue or adding any more delay. The entire commission recognizes the importance of addressing this. Like, this is a historically large deferral we're talking about, and we've got more storms. We got a storm coming this weekend. So we all agree it's not in anyone's interest to keep continue not addressing this issue as the deferral cost continues to potentially grow. So we do want to evaluate the prudency of these costs and figure out recovery. I think we all agree that having securitization as a potential tool here is also like makes this conversation potentially easier to have. And also, I think we all acknowledge a lot of this evidence has been before the authority and all parties for a long time. So just want to convey, we understand all that, but we just can't, we couldn't have this initial conference, for instance, on January 6th, obviously, because here we are January 22nd. So we're doing what we can. So we are hoping to have a productive discussion today. We're hoping we can come up with a schedule that provides a reasonable path forward, but also allows PURA and all the other parties to appropriately review these important and substantial costs that ultimately, some of which ultimately will be ratepayers' responsibility. So with that lengthy monologue out of the way, we can turn to the agenda. I think I already covered the PURA welcome and opening remarks, and we can move to appearances from council. I did have one other kind of quick administrative matter on that, which is not to call him out or make him uncomfortable, but Attorney Jay Goodman from CIEC is here. CIEC filed the motion to intervene on January 20th. So as reflected in the notice of proceeding in our normal course, we don't intend to rule on that motion until at least 7 calendar days have elapsed to allow all parties to respond. But I did just want to ask, we as a courtesy, of course, allowed CIEC to sit at the table. I wanted to ask if there's any objection to CIEC participating this morning, despite not being recognized as an intervener yet.
We have no objection by Eversource. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else object? Okay, so with that, we can take, well, I see the OCC whispering. Objection? No? Okay. So we can start with appearances. Why don't we start with just go left to right around the table. So we can start with OCC and then move this way.
Thank you, Chairman. Good morning, Commissioners. Andrew Minikowski for the Office of Consumer Counsel, and I'm joined by Consumer Counsel Claire Coleman.
Morning, Chairman Wheel. Morning, Chairman Wheel and Thomas Lopez, and I'm joined by Alex Sahi of the Office of Education, Outreach, and Enforcement. Thank you.
Good morning, Susanna Nigro from the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection, and I'm joined by Mr. Eric Annis from BETP.
Good morning, Commissioners. Vincent Pace for Eversource Energy. I'm joined by Attorney Cheryl Kimball and my client, Douglas Horton.
Good morning, Caroline McCormick on behalf of the Office of the Attorney General. I'm here with my colleague, Assistant Attorney General John Wright.
Good morning, Jay Goodman, appearing on behalf of the Connecticut Industrial Energy Consumers. And I appreciate the opportunity to participate while our motion to participate is pending.
Thank you. I also wanted to add that I don't want to make any promises, but we are looking into putting more microphones at these tables, which I think everyone's going to be happy to, I don't know how long that's going to take, but we're working on it. So next on the agenda, we have a discussion on the agenda, but I understand, as I referenced before, Eversource filed a slide presentation and it asked to do some opening remarks, which we're happy to take. I do want to acknowledge I saw OCC's correspondence. I think the commissioners have evaluated that, and we all agree that we're not here today to discuss the substance of any of these issues, but Eversource and any party is sort of free to discuss and kind of say whatever you want as part of this morning's presentation. But just to be clear, we're not here to talk about any of the issues that are going to be litigated in this case yet, aside from scheduling. So with that, Mr. Horton, you can feel free to start us off.
Thank you, Chairman, and good morning, Commissioners and other parties of the docket. I'm Doug Horton. I'm the Senior Vice President of Regulatory and Strategic Financial Planning for Eversource. Thank you as well, Chairman, for the opening remarks and the introduction. I will say with all sincerity that the change in the tone at the top with this commission versus the prior, it's palpable, it's appreciated. Well, I know we won't agree on all issues. I believe the parties are all working collaboratively in ways we haven't in years past, and I'm genuinely, honestly looking forward to that continuing through this docket and others. And just you calling us together to explain the rationale for not being able to approve the motion is so greatly appreciated, and we certainly understand the resource constraints. Also understanding today is a procedural conference, We do, without getting into substance of the positions that will be litigated, we felt it's important in setting that procedural schedule for Pure to understand some of the context and background in what has transpired without dwelling on the past, just to put into perspective why we think it's so important that we do act with urgency, realizing that everybody is under-resourced and working on a number of things. And to be honest, that's not going to change. There's a lot of things that are going to continue to come our way. So we are just trying to move forward as expeditiously as possible. I just have a few slides, and I'll try to be brief as I walk through, but I did want to start by acknowledging and thanking the EOE, OTC, and Pure staff for the work that has gone into the discovery so far in the prior docket. There have been more than 1,200 information requests that have been issued. Those questions are thoughtful and thorough, and the review is complete. We know this is a lot to get to, and again, we appreciate their continued and ongoing review. So we can move on to the first slide in the presentation, and the first 3 slides are very similar, and I won't go through each component, but just wanted to start, like I said, with some background and context. I'll get to the slide in a moment, but it represents a pie chart of what goes into a storm cost filing by source of the costs, if you will. In our last rate case, rates were set to contribute $6 million annually in base rates to fund a storm reserve. That storm fund reserve is meant to be a contribution to offset the cost of what are catastrophic storms. So storms that are greater individually than $4 million a year get treated separately from other base rate costs that are subject to ebb and flow that we have to incur and expend and don't get to explicitly recover. For catastrophic storms, those are acknowledged to be separate, not appropriate for base rate recovery and put off to the side. So we have accumulated, and as everybody knows, a significant balance. And as Chairman, you pointed out, we now have a significant problem, which is why we're here to talk about the schedule and to try to move with some urgency through the process forward. For us, this process started in December of 2023 when we submitted our first tranche of storm costs that's outlined here, representing storms from 2018 through 2021. You can see on this slide that in total represented about $634 million of costs. There were 43 storms during that time period and 8 pre-staging events. This slide looks very similar to the slides that follow. It also looks very similar to every individual storm that we respond to, whether it's in Connecticut, in Massachusetts, or in New Hampshire. So we started this process in December of 2023. At the time, we submitted all of our documentation supporting each one of these charges. We also had, at the time, proposed to PURA to establish a replenishment factor, acknowledging that the amount in base rates was woefully insufficient to cover the costs that we were incurring to respond to storms on an ongoing basis. That filing was summarily dismissed by PURA, and we were instructed instead to submit that filing in a rate case. We then submitted that same filing without our request for replenishment in March of 2024, hence initiating the docket 240303. That's roughly 22 months ago. A storm cost filing, it's a compilation of all the documentation, like I said, supports every incremental cost. We produce tens of thousands of pages of invoices. You can see external line and tree crews comprise roughly 80% of the storm costs. We submit documentation behind each charge that we have. There's direct labor charge for internal Eversource personnel that support the storm events. There's also logistical charges for food and lodging, vehicle charges, et cetera. Those are all charges that we submit documentation for in every storm filing. We also produce testimony that describes the nature of each weather event and the unique circumstances of our response. We describe how we determine whether a cost is incremental and appropriate for recovery. And we also present documentation in these cases, realizing that we were in a very difficult regulatory environment and a difficult regulatory situation. We went an extra step above and beyond the internal review that we conduct for our storm cost prudency documentation compilation of engaging with PricewaterhouseCoopers to attest to the accuracy and validity of the costs that we were presenting for PURA's review. If we can move to the next slide, this shows the second batch of storm costs that we submitted in December of 2024. We realized at the time that costs were, of course, continuing to accumulate, and the balance, the wall of costs that was growing for customers was only getting bigger, and the future problem, which is here now, was becoming more and more significant and sizable. We wanted to move forward with the prudency review, again, as expeditiously as we could. So we submitted a second batch of storm costs in December of 2024, which took us for storm events in 2022 and into 2023, total of 173 million and 9 storms. Again, the pie chart looks very similar. Our filing was in all material respects identical to the prior one. In July of 2025, we updated again to continue to reflect the storm costs that we had been incurred with another batch of storms. 171 million for 10 storms was filed in July of 2025. All the while, Pura was telling us either through the proceeding or publicly that these costs could not be dealt with outside of a rate case, and there was never a schedule that was established that was intended to reach an end of the proceeding. The schedule was trickling on and discovery was continuing. We weren't sure what was ultimately going to happen, but no, ultimately there was never a schedule that was established. But still, the filings that are before Pura now comprise about $980 million, and it only reflects the storm costs through 2023. So here in 2026, we know that the storms have continued to occur. We've continued to have to respond. We've continued to have to pay for those external line crews and for our internal resources to respond to those weather events, such that now, and if we go to the next slide, we know that in total we have about we can advance one more. I got behind in my instructions. We have about $1.5 billion of storm costs that have accrued. That's inclusive of the financing costs that we have incurred, recognizing that we've paid out for those storm costs, but we do not have the cash receipt to compensate us for those storm costs, meaning that the costs have to be financed in some way. I realize that is a substantive issue of dispute, but nonetheless, those costs have been incurred, and in our perspective are just as real as the underlying restoration costs that we have had to pay to our employees, to our external resources that we rely on to restore service to our customers in a weather event. On the right side of this chart, I'm also showing the customer contributions, which in total amount to about $218 million, or 1/7 of the total. That is also inclusive of carrying charges. We have about $6 million in base rates, plus an additional roughly $54 million for prior storm costs that have been approved but now fully recovered that are continuing to offset that balance. But this, again, represents a wall of costs that in our estimation and perspective, at this point in time, we know needs to be dealt with, and it's going to come at a significant cost to our customers. If we move forward to the next slide, which brings us to why we are here and why we are so appreciative to be talking about a schedule, but also why we really do want to try to move as expeditiously as we can. We are starting as we're proposing a schedule and trying to advance through this proceeding with some foundational principles. First and foremost is that storm response in our preparation for storms, it's a no-fail proposition for our customers, for our communities, for our state leaders, and for our regulators. We know that we need to be ready. We know what is expected of us, either by our customers or that which is expected of us and codified into law or by Pura's rules with regard to our emergency response plans. We have to bring in the external crews. Those crews have to be brought in accordance with our ERP. And you can see from the prior slides that those crews comprise the vast majority of the costs that we have incurred in order to respond to those weather events, whether it be service and line crews, tree crews, damage assessors, wire down guards, et cetera. And with that, we have a significant problem, and one that I certainly hope and know that we all do never face again, and one that I believe that we have a responsibility for our customers to resolve in the least painful way as possible. We also have a tool, thanks to the General Assembly passing the law to enable securitization, and thanks in large part to the OCC's advocacy for such a tool. I had tried for several years prior and failed, so I appreciate the support. We now do have a tool. Securitization is an opportunity for us that we should be taking advantage of. We're going to perhaps dispute whether it's $1.5 billion, whether it's $2 billion, whether it's $1 billion. The ultimate amount is going to be a big number. And anytime a regulator decides that a cost should be recovered from customers over a period of time, securitization, I believe this is an objective fact, but perhaps it's just my opinion, is the best way to do so. Securitization allows us to achieve the highest possible credit rating, AAA rating, better than the United States government, and for the lowest possible financing costs that we can achieve for our customers. It's also a highly involved process. In order to achieve that credit rating, there are several prerequisites. We have to have the legislation. Thankfully, we now do. We have to have a prudency determination from our regulator. We can't begin the process of compiling the financing application until we know the precise amount that we can securitize. So with the foundational premise that securitization is a good thing, and anytime we have a cost that we'll need to recover over a number of years, we should be trying to securitize as much as we can and as quickly as we can. So we're starting from that premise. Our customers are on the other end of this equation. And if that is a premise that we can all agree to, then we'd all have that shared goal to move as quickly as we could and maximize the amount that we can securitize. It's a highly involved process, meaning it's also a highly expensive process. The upfront costs, while we can achieve the lowest possible debt rate, the upfront costs are significant, approaching $10 million or more. And therefore, it requires us to have a large bucket of cost to expend or to spread those upfront costs over in order to achieve the lowest possible carrying costs and also to experience the lowest possible bill impact for customers. That would also include carrying charges. In our perspective, like I said, those are just the same as any of the restoration costs. It's real, we've incurred them. So to the extent we are going to be recovering those costs and customers ultimately paying them, it's important that we have clarity as to whether and to what extent so that we can proceed with securitization financing process, inclusive of all costs that would be securitized. The prudency determination is the first step in the process. From there, it takes us approximately 4 months to go through the rigor to establish the financing application that would then kick off the review by PURA, which under law, PURA has 120 days for its review. And then from the date that the financing order is issued, it can take anywhere between 2 and 6 months for us to actually execute on on that securitization. All the while, storm costs are going to continue to materialize. The costs that we're here to discuss only take us through 2023. There's principal and financing costs for 24, for 25, and Chairman Willie just mentioned perhaps even more this weekend. So there is a problem that exists today, and there's an ongoing problem. So we're starting from a premise that we want to securitize as much as we can and as quickly as we can, and we cannot start that process until we have the prudency review. And lastly, and before I hand it over to Vincent to walk through the schedule on the last slides, I just wanted to point out a few last things. Again, we're operating on the principle that securitization is a customer-friendly tool, and that we should be securitizing as much as we can and as soon as we can. I know that we're asking for a lot of work to be accelerated and for a schedule to be established that allows that to happen. And so I want to say with as much deference and respect as possible, it is true that we submitted our last batch of storm costs in July of 2025. And we also at that time formalized our request for carrying charges in that proceeding. But we've been told repeatedly by PURA for years that these storm costs should not be provided and submitted for PURA for its review outside of a rate case. I don't need to tell anyone here, especially with the workload of PURA's, its staff, and all of the parties, that a rate case is one of the few docketed proceedings that come with a statutory requirement to issue a decision in a time frame of 350 days. So from my estimation and perspective, it never made sense to try to cram in the review of 8 years of storm costs, including the hundreds of thousands of pages of documentation, into a time-bound proceeding that would only be allowed 350 days for PURA to issue its review. Tranche 1 filed in December of 2023 or March of 24, if you start from the clock when PURA, after PURA denied our initial application, which is nearly 2 years or 2 rate cases since that filing had been made. Tranche 2 of our storms we filed in December of 2024. Here sitting now in January 26, that's more than a year or 1 rate case since we had initially filed those applications. And even the third batch of storms that we had filed in July of 2025, by the time PURA issues its decision, whether it adopts our quicker schedule, the second schedule that Vincent will walk through, or any other schedule, it will be more than a rate case by the time PURA issues that decision. The problem really is that there has not been a schedule. It has been an endless discovery process, and the discovery has been excellent. There's been things that have been found. The discovery there in large part is audits. It's looking at very specific invoices, pages of invoices, asking about particular line items. It's all good discovery, but from our estimation, there's been about $1 million of disallow of adjustments, downward adjustments that have been found out of the $980 million of storm costs that have been filed. Prior to our application, we had submitted all the costs for a separate review by PricewaterhouseCoopers that resulted in an adjustment of $800,000 that has been made and taken off the top. The $1 million is $200,000 more than that, meaning the $800,000 is inclusive in that amount. So while it is a very extensive process and we appreciate the review and we should be finding every last dollar that should come out, if we were to continue on that process, I'd argue it would be endless. We'd never reach an end. Typically, in a proceeding with a timeline, there's a period of discovery that will include both audit type questions as well as substantive type questions, which would allow the other parties to come up with theories and arguments as to why certain costs should not be allowed and should be adjusted out of the storms. For instance, in prior storm dockets here in Connecticut, there wasn't at that time an established method for determining whether and to what extent storm costs that we were including should be capitalized. So there were arguments made that Pierre listened to and ultimately reached the decision to capitalize certain costs, meaning they would come out of the initial application and be charged to a capital account to be reviewed in a rate case and recovered over time. That now is established. So we've through the prior proceedings established a way to capitalize costs, and those costs have now been, following that Pierre precedent, adjusted and not included here. So what we're asking for Pierre to do is to establish a timeline, a reasonable timeline that has the parties, given all the extensive review that has gone on, introduce their theories and arguments as to whether and to what extent we've included costs that shouldn't be appropriate for recovery for whatever reason. That's the process that we go through in other states and the process that has been followed in my experience in Connecticut in the past and other dockets and other storm proceedings. And the last thing I'll say is, before I hand it over to Vincent with regard to schedule, is like I said, the securitization process is intensive. It will, in our estimation, it makes sense to do it once. It will potentially not even be possible to do it more than once. So our guiding foundational principle of trying to get as much securitized as we possibly can is guiding a lot of our discussions, but so is our expectation to be filing a CLMP rate case this year. We expect to file a rate case on June 1st. And not only will it be then just that much more regulatory workload for all parties once that case is in, even if we were to put that aside, the practical reality of as we are looking at it, and certainly as I am looking at it, is if we file a rate case on June 1st with a 350-day statutory requirement for Pure to issue a decision, we're going to need to include a proposal for recovery of the $1.5 billion in that rate case. We cannot presume, and I believe the OCC's comments this morning indicated as much, that we can't presume that securitization will happen. We have to get approval of the prudency amount. We then have to go through a financing application in which we have to demonstrate that securitization is actually achieving all the benefits that I'm claiming it will. It's better for customers to securitize than to do it in another way. So in a rate case, we're going to have to do what Pierre has been saying for the last several years, which is include all of these costs in a rate case. The problem becomes, the longer the schedule goes, realizing that we cannot even begin the process of the securitization application until we have the prudency review. We will not be able to have a decision on the securitization prior to that rate case outcome happening. If you think about a schedule that has a prudency review decision issued on August 1st of 2026, and if it's then 8 months for us to get to the financing order, 4 months for us to prepare that filing, 4 months for Pierre's review based on the statute, that's going to put us at a position where we only get the securitization decision perhaps 1 month before the rate case order comes out. It'll be beyond that will mean that a securitization order would come out either at the same day as the rate case order or after. And so I think, I'm not a lawyer, but that's going to create, if nothing else, an awkward scenario where Pierre is going to have to issue a rate case decision, and I don't think can presume recovery through securitization of something that it's currently evaluating. So that will result in a problem, in my estimation, that customers are going to be the ones holding the bag. So I really appreciate you giving me the latitude to make those comments, and I will now hand it over to Vincent to talk through why we have 2 schedules before you.
And if we can go to the very last slide, and thank you, and good morning to the commissioners, good morning to the parties. We appreciate the chance to be here today, and I appreciate the chairman's remarks that the initial schedule we had proposed in our December 15th motion was not realistic. That schedule had proposed a final decision by March 31st. We're very sensitive to the fact that the authority's workload is very significant, and you're working very hard on multiple dockets, as is the workload for the other parties here. We recognize that. We're not tone deaf to that, and therefore we've submitted these proposals to recognize that we're trying to be flexible, we're trying to be reasonable. So what are we showing you here? What we're showing you here in the very first column is just a series of milestones that are typical for a contested case. I'm not going to walk through each of them, but I do want to move to the second column, which is the Eversource proposal. And what that proposes, if you look at the middle of the page in the yellow row, it shows that in this docket, 25-12-13, we were proposing a schedule that would generate a final decision, an adjudication on prudence by May 27th, 2026. If we look at the rows that follow, it shows that, as Mr. Horton had mentioned, we're currently proposing to file CLMP rate case on June 1st, 2026. And let's focus on the green row below that. What does that represent? What that represents would be that if the authority were to stick to that schedule and issue a decision by May 27, 2026, then based on the timing Mr. Horton talked about, 8 months later, in February 2027, we'd expect to have a decision by the authority on securitization. Recall, he said it was an 8-month process, 4 months to pull together all the materials, and then by statute, the agency has 4 months to adjudicate whether or not we'd have securitization. The benefit of that approach is, while the rate case is pending, we have an understanding if the authority is comfortable authorizing securitization, which means those costs will not go into base rates. They would be securitized and recovered through a separate rate component called the competitive transition assessment. And then you'd see in the very last row, the final statutory date for new rates in a rate case, which would be June 1st, 2027. If we move now to the very last column to the right, that's a proposal, and it's not ideal for us, but we've heard feedback from the OCC, DEEP, and the AG, and no one is disputing just how much workload they have. We understand that, we acknowledge that. And the difference between this schedule is we build in an additional 2 months. And so under this proposal, it shows if we move down to the yellow line towards the bottom, it would show that in this docket, 25-12-13, we're proposing a final decision by July 29th, 2026. We also restate there that at that time, the CLMP rate case would be pending at that point, would have been filed on June 1st. And if you adhere to this time schedule, what that would mean is in the green row, 8 months later, in April of 2027 is when we would receive a decision on whether or not you're supportive of financing and securitizing storm costs. We feel that with all the other issues going on in a rate case, it's important not to cut it too close and have the financing order come out the day before or the week before you go final in a rate case. It's important for parties to understand the impact it has on the outcome in the rate case and to allow for that to be taken into consideration when you talk about rate design and other dynamics that are talked about in a rate case. So that the last few points I just want to very briefly make when you evaluate these proposals would be, we appreciate the Office of Consumer Counsel's comments that were filed last night or this morning, and they proposed an alternate schedule, and we appreciate their efforts to try and work with us in good faith. One fact I'd like you to think about when you look at their proposal would be, if you were to accept their proposal and we end up in a situation where a decision comes out in this docket, a final decision by September, what that means is, as Mr. Horton talked about, we probably don't know when the rate case goes final what your position is on securitization, or we're cutting it awfully close. And so our view is it's important to have context. It's important to see the connections between the proposal in front of you and other dockets in the future to understand how the pieces fit together. And the last point I'd like to very briefly make would be, as Mr. Horton pointed out, the OCC and EOE have done yeoman's work in terms of discovery in the storm docket to date. Based on our count, we filed 1,228 interrogatory responses. Many of those are multi-part questions. As of Friday, we showed that we had 42 questions outstanding. We are working in good faith to try and respond to those. Last Friday, we received an additional 78 questions from OCC and EOE. We'll continue to work very hard. We have a team that meets every day at 1 o'clock, a cross-functional team, to try and respond to these interrogatories as best we can. What I think is also helpful to point out, we're now at a point in this docket where we've gotten into the weeds on many questions. And this is not a criticism, but it shows we really are focusing on some very comparatively small issues. I'm just going to give you some examples. In OCC 228, we had questions about a $6 expense incurred 5 years ago. In question EOE 347, we had a question about a $75 expense. In EOE 399, there was a question about a $73 expense. All those things take lots of time for people to track down the invoice, whether it was for a meal for a line worker or to put gas in a truck, find the invoice and provide information about it. That's not a criticism. It's actually a compliment because they're doing significant work. They're getting into the weeds. But I think at some point we have to say we need to move beyond discovery and move towards asking parties to take a position about what they feel about these storm costs. And we have no objection to the parties hiring consultants. We know that the OCC had a consultant in the 24 docket. They've issued a notice in this docket to hire a consultant. We have no objection to them having extra help to be able to manage the workload and to try and manage the schedule we've proposed. So our request to you is, in recognition of all the workload we're all experiencing, I don't think there's a perfect time in the next year where the workload's going to decrease. And we think we put in front of you, in all due respect, some reasonable options that we think balance all the valid concerns that we've heard from the commission and from the parties. We thank you for the chance to give this presentation. We're happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. I think Commissioner Arconti has a question. Vice Chairman Arconti. Apologies.
I just had a quick question on the scheduling, but like the timing. So if we ultimately went forward that resulted in a final decision in this docket, let's just we'll assume the May 27th date. I think it's cleaner that way. Right? This is a contested docket, right? So if the company decided to appeal, how would that throw off the rest of the timing in the proposal?
I can start, and certainly Vincent will correct me, but I think so. There's a few things. We obviously today we're talking about a procedural schedule. We also have had discussions with other parties. We're talking about litigation versus settlement. I certainly cannot represent that settlement is going to happen, but my opinion is that if we are able to resolve issues via settlement and therefore have a decision, if that settlement's ultimately approved, that would not be appealed, at least by the parties that settle, that's a much cleaner path. Versus if we get a litigated outcome in a contested proceeding that's appealed by any party, I honestly don't know how that affects the securitization process. I don't know. And because the whole reason, the value of securitization is the certainty, I'm just not sure how things move forward in the securitization process if things are under appeal. If we don't have a critical dollar amount for securitization, perhaps that leaves us in a position where securitization is not the vehicle that we're going to use to recover whatever costs are approved. Well, in that instance, it would be the company pursuing appeal. So I think it really would depend on how the rating agencies view that process. What's the dollar amount that we are securitizing? Is that considered to be at risk or in jeopardy? The whole thing is really, for securitization to get that AAA rating, it's because it is tying everybody's hands. The securitized bond holders are essentially assured and guaranteed that the regulator will not subsequently reverse course and try to claw something back. It's a very unique instrument, only available to, as far as I know, to utilities. In circumstances where you have those defined prerequisites, the dollar amount's not in dispute, the financing order has everything that it needs, the rate cannot be adjusted, or can only be adjusted to ensure that the bondholders are being repaid, et cetera.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, and I'm just want to make sure I'm speaking just for myself here. I know I'm 0 for 2 in encouraging settlements from the bench so far in the last 6 months. Maybe I can go 1 for 3, but speaking just for myself, I do think that is probably the most optimal path. So I would encourage everybody and all the parties to keep working hard towards that potential outcome. That's it. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
If you go 1 for 3, that puts you in the Hall of Fame, so.
I do want to ask for, I know I saw OCC's filing and I want to give OCC and everyone else a chance to kind of also kind of give a presentation or say their piece. I did have one question for clarification, and I'm sure it's obvious. I think I get it. My question when I saw this presentation filed was I was a little confused by the distinction between the two columns, but just for clarification, Eversource proposal represents like what was initially proposed to the other parties, and then there's the second column sort of an adjustment to that based on the feedback from the other parties.
That's correct. And in fairness to the parties, they've not had a lot of time to respond to that second proposal, but the middle proposal that culminates on May 27th is our ideal proposal for Eversource. It's not perfect, but ultimately it's an effort to respond to the feedback we've been hearing. We've received additional feedback from the OCC and EOE and the AG. And so on Tuesday, I sent to them the schedule you see at the very far right. And that culminates in a July 29th, 2026 decision. And I realize, to be very clear, their feedback during our conversations were this schedule is not workable for them. And I'll let them express their concerns. They communicate that, but we're trying to work in good faith. We're trying to bridge the gap. Again, if we have our druthers for the reasons Mr. Horton talked about, it's that May 27th date that we think is reasonable based on all the factors that we talked about.
Okay. Thank you. And unless other commissioners have questions for Eversource, I think we can ask Consumer Counsel Coleman if you want to respond or talk about your filing.
Thank you, Chair Whale. I appreciate the opportunity. There is a lot to respond to, and we did submit a letter recognizing that this is a procedural conference and we're not going to get belabored into the details on substance. But our concern is that in Eversource presenting their view of the facts and process in the manner this morning, it frames the issues in a way that in our view, places, customers at risk. And we want to ensure that the authority knows that we strongly disagree with, both facts and law presented. And of course, that will be unpacked throughout this proceeding. But, the first time you hear something it often sticks with you. So that is our concern with, turning the procedural conference into an advocacy space. That being said, since Eversource gave a bit of a pitch on, which I would characterize as advocacy, to sort of just highlight OCC's perspective, first I want to acknowledge everybody's recognition of how much is happening here before PURA. Chair Wheel's comments, I know all of the commissioners here are working incredibly hard, and the staff to keep up with the demand. Our agency, and I personally feel the pain as well. We've been working around the clock to keep up with all of the current ongoing proceedings as well as the redos that are happening. And we're about to enter a legislative session to add on to that. So as Attorney Pace referenced, we did express to them in our meeting, our scheduling constraints because they are one company, and we have to present the views and interests of ratepayers with every single regulated utility in the state. So you can multiply that work by tenfold. So I acknowledge that, in their presentation today, they have, moved towards, closer towards what the state agencies view is feasible. And Attorney Minikowski will go through that in detail. But just to go back to some of the framing issues that we heard this morning, even the presentation of costs, we want to ensure that the authority knows that, the costs presented today are the costs of what Eversource has spent, not what is necessarily appropriate for recovery. And that is what we and our other state agency partners, have been digging into through discovery. Mr. Horton referenced the PwC audit, but he appropriately acknowledged that that PwC audit is for accuracy and validity. And what we are doing here is a prudency review, which is much different. So there is, just cause to ensure that we have the adequate time and resources to ensure that we've done a thorough review there. And while Attorney Pace referenced some small dollar amounts that we may be evaluating through discovery, I can assure the commission that there are some very large and alarming dollar amounts that we have also discovered that will be subject to hearings and questioning of Eversource about why they spent certain dollars in certain ways that, will make your eyes pop. So it goes both ways there. In terms of the securitization process, I appreciate Mr. Horton's acknowledgement that that our office and I personally did support securitization and getting that authorization to the legislature, and acknowledge the benefits that that financing with lower interest rates can bring to customers, and look forward to the opportunity to evaluate that process more closely with all of the parties and the authority. I do think, while it is helpful for us all to think through the intersection between securitization and rate cases and distribution rates and how these things would be recovered and the timing, I understand why Eversource has presented some background on that, but I do want to caution that in our view, the securitization process is separate, would be a separate proceeding. The authority, in our view, does not have to set a schedule right now on the securitization process. I've reviewed previous dockets where the EDCs would submit an application for the issuance of a financing order, which we assume would follow this docket, this prudency review. In our view, there are other parties that aren't here in this prudency review docket, such as the Office of the Treasury, that should be engaged in that process. And, we want to ensure that they're at the table to consider what role they can play to help ensure that we're getting rate reduction bonds at the lowest cost possible. So, I think we can, while continuing to think about the alignment of timing, it would be our position that a scheduling order issued as a result of today's proceeding does not have to reflect that financing order and securitization process. In addition to, our dispute of the cost framing as outlined in our letter, we strongly believe that Eversource's request for carrying charges is unsupported. There have been three storm cost recovery filings over 3 years from Eversource without ever asking for carrying charges. So, to see it up on a slide as if it's as we said in our letter, fait accompli is of concern to us, and we want to ensure that the authority, is prepared for, to evaluate the legal arguments of all parties. Carrying charges are, in our view, contrary to pure precedent and to state law. And we hope the authority will consider that further as we proceed. I think I will, at this point, turn it over to Attorney Minikowski to go through the schedule proposed by the state parties. And, we did, recognizing time is tight, I want to acknowledge that Eversource, after meeting with us Tuesday, did take some of our feedback into consideration. It was 10:30 at night, so I know they were working hard when Attorney Pace provided us a second consideration. State agencies have a lot of review and approval processes, so it wasn't until last night that we were all able to get our consensus counter proposal in place, and decided, given the presentation of their presentation submitted Pura, it would be most expeditious for us to submit it directly to the authority. So thank you for allowing me to provide that context, and I'll turn it over to Andrew.
Thank you, Consumer Counsel. And thank you to the Commission for holding this procedural conference and to Mr. Horton and Attorney Pace for their presentation this morning. Mr. Bumpin has pulled our proposal from our filing this morning up on the screen. If you can't see that, I also have paper copies. So if anyone would like one of those, they can go around the room. We're sorry we couldn't get this earlier. As Consumer Counsel Coleman mentioned, getting all the plums in the pudding with state agencies can take quite some time, but we did our best. And as mentioned, our schedule that we propose here, and this has been agreed to by our office, EOE, DEEP, and the Attorney General's office. This is a reaction to the second Eversource proposal, which is in the second column there. And really, when you look at it, we're about a month apart between the companies and our proposal. So although there is some disagreement about time and how much these things will take, we are ultimately close. And I would request that Pura take that into consideration as it goes to make its own schedule that it sets in this docket. That, you know, although we still have some points of contention here in the schedule, which I'll go through, we're not that far away. So under the schedule we proposed, I won't go through it line by line. I will just preface it with the assumption of the schedule we put together is that it storms through 2023. You know, the 2024 and 2025 storms, we just don't have substantiation in the record to go through those yet. So this schedule was put together with the understanding that we were going up through 2023 and the information that we do have. And given that volume of the record, which is a behemoth, made this schedule accordingly. The main difference, you'll see the discovery responses are the same, but one of the main differences with our schedule is the hearing dates. We've added substantially quite a few more hearing dates than the company had proposed. We just think given the size of this record and the number of issues that it will entail, that we probably will need a significant amount of time in the hearing room just to get through the material. And also, given the size of the record, pulling that material up will also inject some delay into those proceedings. So we have proposed for Pura's consideration a lengthier period of initial evidentiary hearings to take place. And between the company and then the state agency's proposal, we are aligned on having the late file hearing dates be 2 days as well. The next major difference, of course, is the briefing, and this is sort of where there is some difference between the parties. Again, we're a little over a month apart for briefs being due, and then the company proposal had a week for reply briefs. We've given 2 weeks there, recognizing that there are significant factual and legal disputes in this proceeding, and that it's likely that the parties will want some time to digest the briefs, which will likely be large, filed by the other parties, and respond to them in a thorough and convincing manner for the authority's benefit. After that point, everyone will notice that we've left the schedule blank. And the reason we did that was because at that point, it's in Pura's hands, you know, in terms of putting together a draft decision, scheduling argument, getting a decision finalized. That's all incumbent on the commissioner's time and the time of the Pura staff. And we didn't want to presume to know what internal workloads were at Pura. So we've left that accordingly at Pura's discretion to set a schedule after that point that works for them. Just to follow up on the vice chairman's question previously to the company, again, the wild card here is one that if this does not settle and we reach a final decision, of course, it's a contested case. There are appellate rights. Parties have 45 days to make that decision. But then at that point, it's kind of off the table, and how that affects the process is open. It's just, I don't know if any of us could come up with anything other than pure speculation today about how that might affect the timing of a final resolution of this docket if it is appealed, and then ultimately moving on to the securitization process through a financing order docket. If the commission has any questions, I'm happy to answer them. And of course, this is a joint proposal from the state parties, so I would invite my colleagues from my sister state agencies to make any comments they feel are appropriate.
Thanks. Does anyone want to add to OCC's presentation? Attorney Lopez.
If I may, thank you, what I wanted to, and Attorney Minikowski did just mention it, and we wanted to be clear that we believe this discussion is about storms through the end of 2023, because there was some indication in the filing in in motion 1 and 2 that there was, indication about storms from 2024 and 2025. So we just wanted to be clear that we were talking about through 2023.
And could I just confirm to clarify for the record, so that would mean it's $980 million of storm costs and also the carrying charges are something separate, but I just want to confirm when you say 2023, that's how we're interpreting that number.
Yes.
Thank you.
Correct. So just a few things that I wanted to point out on the schedule. Obviously, I support the state party's proposal. I wanted to just call the commission's attention to our response to motion number 2, and it's really for context. Of course, when Eversource sought a determination of prudency of 5 storms in 2018, and I refer you to docket 181112. That docket the company submitted its petition on November 16th, 2018, and the authority filed its decision on April 17th, 2019. Okay, so, and that was about 5 months, or 1 month per storm. So if that same timeline is used, a review of, well, I think it's 60 storms over 50, let's, from my filing, I had 53. 53 storm events equals 53 months from the time that was filed. Even if the company's filing date of, let's take December 22nd, 2023, that puts a final decision around 4 years from the date of filing, or May 2028. I'm not saying that is reasonable. And I say that for context of the magnitude of what we're looking at in these storms. So that's what I really wanted to provide that, and that's why I think the state's party's proposal is reasonable here. I also wanted to, I obviously thank the company for moving on the schedule, and I agree, right? We're about a month apart when you really look at that, so we are close. But to the contention that, we are getting in the weeds, and I think, one, yes, we are. I think that's a testament to my staff and all the state party staffs looking at, this massive record, right? We're talking about tens and thousands of pages. And so when we're talking about some of these smaller things, the purpose is, right, to get to the issue of broader internal controls. And so I just wanted to make a point, I'll do a shameless plug. I just got back from Bahrain the other day. I'm in the Navy and the reserves, and I just had to file all my receipts, right? And every little thing, my meals, I was on the base, and then I was kicked off the base, and then I was at a hotel, and my plane tickets, and obviously that all goes through review. And I mean, we're talking about a few $100 ultimately of receipts, right? But over the entire Department of the Navy, and now what they call the Department of War, that is all the people traveling on orders across the world, that adds up, right? And so the purpose of any review and audit is to understand the broader issues. So while some of the questions may get at very specific topics or very relatively small dollar amounts, it paints a broader picture. So I just wanted to provide that for context, and I thank everyone for the opportunity to speak today. Thank you.
Chairman, if I could respond, we've been listening very carefully to the feedback that was provided by the parties here today. And we've talked about their proposal. So we could actually look at the very last column up there under state party's proposal. We are actually good with everything they have. They're up through May 15th. we're trying to work with people to see if we can find a compromise solution. I don't want to get into, into the details, but I think the following points may be helpful to the remaining 3 items they have on there, which is, it's been my experience, we don't need two full weeks after May 15th for a late file hearing. We can probably push those up into the following week. And then a month, do a brief. That's if we can move up the late file hearings to maybe May 19th and May 20th, then the briefs can go in 3 weeks later on June 9th and reply briefs 2 weeks after that on June 23rd. That would shave off a couple of weeks. I'm not asking them to respond to that, but I'm just trying to see if maybe we can reach a compromise on something that's not perfect for all of us, but reasonable to help us move towards the ultimate goal of making sure that when the rate case is being adjudicated, we can have an answer from the commission if they're amenable or not amenable to securitization, to know whether or not that's going to be in base rates or recovered separately through securitization and the competitive transition assessment. So again, those tweaks for those who weren't ready for them would be where it shows late file hearing. You currently have that May 28th to May 29th. We propose May 19th and May 20th. And then for initial briefs, you're showing July 1st. We'd say June 9th. That would be 3 weeks after the late file hearing. And then for the reply briefs that you're showing July 17th, we'd propose June 23rd. And so, with that, we can make that work. And in the spirit of compromise, we're trying to see if we can resolve the open issues between us. I don't know if you feel comfortable responding to that on the fly, or if you want some more time, but just wanted to put that out there for your consideration.
Thank you, Attorney Pace. I did just want to advise the authority, one of the considerations we had in the late file hearing schedule is our awareness that NECPUC is Monday, May 18th through the 20th, which I know that the commission participates in heavily, as does our office, the Office of Consumer Counsel. So that would be a potential scheduling conflict there. And we will consider the rest of this proposal as soon as we can.
Thank you. I was gonna suggest, I've been staring at the dates here, and based on my understanding from all parties so far, it seems like frankly, folks haven't maybe had a final opportunity to kind of look at OCC's most recent response and sort of try to work out whether, and I acknowledge frankly, Eversource has now been amenable to adjusting its initial proposed schedule twice, and I recognize that. I mean, there was the initial motion, and then your first column here, and then the second column. But it does sound like, Attorney Pace, that you're also looking at these dates and thinking there might be some way to kind of figure something out potentially. So I'd echo the vice chairman, at least with respect to the scheduling, that it does seem like the most efficient way might be for everybody to kind of come together and see if it's possible to file a joint agreed schedule. The way we were going to proceed as a commission after today was to sort of take everybody's input and take it back and see what we could do ourselves, basically doing the same process upstairs all by ourselves. It would be way more helpful for us if we knew all these dates sort of work for everybody else. So it would be great if, even if frankly, there could be another filing saying, we've at least agreed to these portions, we have disagreement as to these dates. That would be really helpful for us.
We think that's very reasonable, and we look forward to working with them, providing an update as you explained. Thank you.
Yeah, we're happy to do that well and assume the state parties agree. I do want to flag that, it's not just the end deadlines that matter to us. One of the things we raised in our discussions and is reflected in the state party's proposal is we wanted to ensure that we had the ability to complete our discovery, including discovery on pre-filed testimony, as we'd have the opportunity to do if these costs were filed in the context of a rate proceeding, and have an ability to respond iteratively to testimony and, through the late file and briefing process as well. So I think we're getting a little closer there, but you can see there are still some substantial differences with discovery and points and the timing of pre-filed testimony. So we're happy to continue to work with Eversource to achieve alignment there, but in the event that we submit two different things, that's important context for the authority to understand. And I do just want to say, with all of this, we've been cautioning and expressing, the challenge of completing such a burdensome, such a large review within such a short time period. But we also, as state parties, have made, significant concessions from the previous timelines, and I recognize the timelines for these proceedings have ebbed and flowed. But we really need to strike a balance between resolving these issues expeditiously, which I agree is in the interest of ratepayers, but if we do it too expeditiously, we'll shortchange them in terms of review, both in the discovery process, the legal evaluation, and the authority's ability to consider this carefully. So we do want the authority to make sure it takes the time to evaluate after the hearings all of the evidence that will be presented. So with that, happy to return to the settlement or the negotiating table with Eversource and work out a schedule.
And just the last comment I'd like to make is I appreciate the Consumer Counsel's comments, but at the end of the day, at some point, there needs to be some effort towards closure when it's been open for so long and for the reasons we mentioned in terms of the impacts on rate case and securitization and ultimately what that means for customer bills. So that we can't support a situation where we're now into the summer and discovery is still open. We think that all the schedules up there show a reasonable amount of time for discovery to be completed, knowing that we've gotten over 1,200 questions we responded to with multiple subparts over a 2-year period. And so thank you for the opportunity today. We appreciate it.
If I may, just to respond to that, I mean, I think the premise behind those statements is one of our concerns with the presentation of actual evidence today and legal argument, because we don't want the authority to feel boxed in a corner like it has to decide this in a rushly in a way that may negatively impact ratepayers. We disagree, while, decisions have been made by Eversource as a company and the authority over the past few years about timing and method. Eversource has had a pathway to get these costs reviewed through a rate case for several years. So the fact that there have been delays, there are a myriad of reasons, and many of them point to business decisions of Eversource. So it's not fair to now say, in light of decisions we've made, now you have to do something in a manner that may put customers at risk. So that, and the same goes for the prudency costs and the prudency framing. That, my concern is the arguments presented by Eversource today make the authority feel boxed into a corner to say we've got to do this quickly because of the costs that are incurring on a daily basis when the law clearly states otherwise. So again, it's just important to reframe this. We all want to get this done quickly. We want to address prior storm costs. We've advocated in other dockets, in the performance-based rate-making docket, for processes where storm costs would not accrue for so long. We don't think that's in the interest of customers, and want to work with the companies and the authority on improved processes going forward. But we can't scrap, expedite procedure to a level that makes it meaningless. We have to ensure that customers are protected and are only paying for prudently incurred costs through all of these storms, and that's our priority here today.
And if I could just, I promise I'll be brief. I completely agree. I think with some of that, especially to the point of, look, we've all been left in a bad situation. And a lot of the dockets, Chairman, that you referenced are a result of the bad situation that we're all being left with. And so we're trying to navigate through. We are not trying to shortcut any process. I know it's not commonly held by others, but our customers are at the front of our minds. And that's why we started with the foundational principle. Our customers are going to need to pay these costs, which are significant. So we're going to disagree on certain specifics. I get that. We're not trying to box anybody in. We're trying to present the reality. We're trying to present the context and the history that it was PURA that was saying that all of this should be done in a rate case, a time-bound proceeding. That was PURA. The prior PURA was telling us essentially stop filing these storm costs in this proceeding and wait to put them all in a rate case, which the only point is that would have resulted in a very extreme, intense process, knowing that there was other things stacked up in that rate case. There was a resiliency plan that was pushed to be evaluated in that rate plan, a reliability plan that was supposed to be evaluated in that rate case, an AMI plan, in addition to the base rate process, which is, everyone knows, is also an extensive review that's required. So we're absolutely not trying to shortcut anything. We realize there's a lot of things that we need to balance, all of us do. So I just want to make sure to mention that we're not trying to rush for the sake of rushing. We're trying to just get to the end because we do honestly and genuinely believe that that's the best interest of our customers.
On my little button, and I want to thank everybody here today, and forgive me, Chairman, if I'm speaking out of turn, but I do want to remind all the parties here, you are talking to a new PURA commission. We are not going to forget the importance of the input from all our state agencies, nor are we going to ignore our responsibility to come up with a decision that is going to reflect the best interests of the people in the state of Connecticut as guided by statute. That is our remit. I will speak for myself. I am going in with no preconceived notions as to how this is going to come out. I will listen fairly and closely to the evidence as presented, and we as a commission will render a decision, and everyone else will live with it. The goal is to come up with a decision based on the evidence, listening to the arguments, that is going to be within the duty and guidelines of this commission. That's my rant for the day. Thank you.
Thank you. We greatly appreciate that.
Thank you, Commissioner Cheeseman. I did also want to add my great relief that among all the things before us in this proceeding, the question of whose fault it is that we are here now is not before this commission. So we will not be adjudicating that, thankfully. Okay, so I think based on the discussion we earlier had with respect to scheduling, we will hope that there will be an updated filing that will hopefully assist us in determining a schedule. But we will kind of work on what we have so far now in the interim to sort of see what we can work out. And we thank all the parties, the company and all the state parties, for their input into those dates. And I'm hopeful that we can figure out something that works for everybody. But again, if you guys can give us something that literally works for everybody, that would be great.
Pardon me, Chair. I apologize for the interruption. May I be heard before?
Oh, absolutely. And I'm sorry. Yes, but I also want to make sure we haven't heard from Deep or the AG's office. I wanted to give you all an opportunity. We kind of got hung up on that. I was kind of going around the room. Does anyone else want to add anything before we circle around to CIEC?
We support the comments that were made by our sister state agencies and have nothing to add. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. We also appreciate the comments of all the parties here today and have nothing further to add.
Thank you. Sorry, Attorney Goodman, please go ahead.
Oh, thank you. I'm sorry if I jumped the gun. I wasn't sure if we were going back to the roundtable or moving on. I just wanted to say that even if our motion to participate had been ruled on, would not have provided us a proposed schedule for a couple of reasons, including that we greatly appreciate the work that the state agencies, particularly OCC and EOE, already have conducted. Represent large non-residential customers. We do not have the resources to do a prudency review or really dive into it. And we rely in large part on the prudency review and the analysis and work done by the state entities. So I would say that, we think it's important for the state entities to have the time that they feel is necessary to conduct the prudency review and to prepare and present their case. So in considering a schedule from my perspective, I wouldn't want to presume what that necessary time is. So, we, from that perspective, would support the state entity's proposal as well. One further comment regarding settlement. We're talking about a litigation schedule here. Whenever the settlement discussions, if they do occur, if the parties come to a point where, hopefully shortly after they start discussions, but come to a point where they believe that a comprehensive settlement might be possible, my proposal and recommendation would be to suspend the litigation schedule, on motion or request to the authority presumably, but to suspend the litigation schedule to enable focus on settlement, because it's, in my opinion, extremely difficult, resource intensive to both try to negotiate a comprehensive settlement on issues of this scope and prepare for litigation or to litigate. It's just something for consideration, but thank you for the opportunity to provide feedback on the schedule.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Just speaking for myself, I think that concept makes sense, but we don't have a schedule yet even to suspend. So, but that's something for certainly consideration. And I know, and we're going to talk, we're not quite done yet. We have two more issues to cover today. And one of them is sort of the last thing we want to kind of touch on is a settlement update, which maybe sort of goes to that. I do, going back to what I suggested before, I do want to ask if it's possible for parties, I do want to set a deadline, I think, or at least a strong suggestion by which parties could file an update to the schedule, because we don't want to be delayed wondering whether you guys are working something out. We want to kind of be able to establish this. And I'm recognizing now that it's already Thursday. Would it be do people think it would be possible to figure something out by the end of the day tomorrow?
I would say yes, that's reasonable for Eversource in terms of either we have agreement or we don't, and we can file our respective positions. So that's acceptable to us.
I'm going to defer to my other state agency partners who have higher, more detailed decision-making structures. I'm looking at deep.
Let's starts and stops with him, so we'll get a deep probably, right?
That schedule is workable for us. Thank you.
Okay. And does that work for the AG's office as well? Okay. So yeah, we'll hope to see something by, and it would be helpful even if there was correspondence just letting us know you all weren't able to work something out, so we just know we're handling it from here. And as I said before, it would even be helpful if there was a single date that, everyone's on board with this date. That would be helpful. Okay. The next. Yeah, there we go. That would.
Day tomorrow, so be
Oh,
a
God.
good present.
I was hoping nobody knew that. Okay.
May?
Sure, yes.
I believe that Consumer Counsel Coleman had mentioned there may be a scheduling issue for the authority. If you could please confirm any dates that the authority would not be available.
We can, I think maybe a case coordinator can reach out maybe by the end of the day today with that, because I frankly am the worst person on earth to answer that question. I don't even know where I'm supposed to be in like 10 minutes, but luckily Robin Bumpet does, so. Okay. The next issue we wanted to touch on, which hopefully is well, we don't know. I touched on this in my opening remarks. There is the question of, I just wanted to see if there was any dispute or if there was sort of a live question as to how much of the evidence from the prior docket is being pulled into this docket. I mean, it's my understanding, I guess I'll start with Eversource. It's my understanding that the proposal from the company is to take literally everything from the prior docket, shifted into this docket. Is that correct?
Yes, Chairman, that's correct. And so just to refer the parties to, it's the December 15th, 2025 motion number 1 that we filed. And we referred to Appendix 1, which as of that moment in time identified all the record evidence we filed in 240330. And of course, the only caveat there would be anything we filed since that date in forms of interrogatory responses would also come into this docket to ensure all that work would not be wasted. It can be carried forward into this docket.
Understood. And is there, I guess I'll start with OCC and maybe go around the room. Is there any objection to that, or is there anything from 240330 that there's an objection to carrying through to this docket?
Thank you, Chairman. No, I think it makes sense to bring all of that record material into this docket. And then for the materials that post-date the filing of motions number 1 and 2 by the company, I believe we have an EOE as well have been cross-filing and filing in the new docket. So some of that material is already in here as well. So thank you. We think that's a good approach.
Okay. And EOE, I think your initial response to motion number 1 outlined some outstanding interrogatories. I'm not sure if that issue still even matters anymore at this point, but first, I guess, is that still an issue? And second, is there any objection to the?
Let me take the second part first. There's no objection. We would agree that everything from 240330 should obviously come into this new docket. What is it, 251213? Hard to keep my numbers straight sometimes. On the other issue, to be perfectly honest, I'm not certain, but I do believe that the company was working to answer whatever outstanding discovery requests there were. So I'm not aware of it still being an issue.
Okay.
The update I can provide would be that I believe as of this morning, for questions issued before January 15th, I think we had in the range of maybe 40 that were left, and we're still working on those. We received an additional 78 questions on Friday the 16th. We'll continue to work on those in good faith to get those in. So from our perspective, we are responding to their questions, and to the extent that EOE has any continued concerns, we're happy to speak with them offline. If the concern cannot be resolved, they can communicate that in the docket.
Okay, thank you. Any objection to the bringing all the evidence over?
Understanding that the parties are in agreement that the information can be brought in fresh into this docket, we have no objection.
Okay. And AG's office?
We have no objections.
Okay. So with, that sounds like a plan to me. We just wanted to make sure that that was both what the company was requesting and whether anyone had any objection. I will just say, it's our hope that continuing discovery will, I hope everybody agrees with this, will align with the same numbering, meaning like if the last interrogatory EOE issued in 240330 was EOE 898, then 899 is where we start, with the first one filed in this present docket. Okay.
Yes, Chairman Wheel, I just wanted to say that we continued our numbering approach. So then when we started cross-filing, it was, I think, made logical sense. So we've continued in that manner.
Okay. And the last thing I'll throw out there is, I believe 240330 has been closed, and I think the case coordinator may be communicated to, we've been sort of dealing with the sort of procedural hiccup of this issue that there is, of the transition from one docket to the next. So I think from my perspective, to the extent there are outstanding interrogatories that were issued in 240330, it's fine, at least from my own perspective, if the company just files those responses in this docket. I don't think there's any reason to file duplicatively in the now closed 240330 unless anyone disagrees with that. Just to save the 30 seconds of extra time of having to file in two dockets for no reason. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay. Yes, Attorney Minikowski.
I hesitate to raise this, but in the event of an administrative appeal, in terms of the completeness of the record in 251213, it might make sense just to transfer everything if possible, just so it's, attorneys aren't going between two dockets to get everything before the court in one.
Yeah, yes, I think that's the plan from our perspective, is we're literally taking every single thing that exists in 240330 and bringing it over exactly as it is there. Not sure Lotus wise about the dates. So I think, I don't think the original dates of filing can be captured in terms of the Lotus programming. You know what I mean? So if you're looking at our program, if it might reflect that the initial application of the company was filed tomorrow or whatever date we're going to do it, although the application itself will have the date on the PDF that exists in the previous docket.
Okay. One thing I did want to flag too, then in that case, is the numbering of motion rulings. Because although the interrogatory numbering continued from the old docket, the motion ruling numbering, probably because of Lotus, restarted.
It's a good point. So we'll have to, I guess that's a good question to flag for everyone. I know, for example, we have a motion number 1 and motion number 2 designated in this docket, and we also surely have a motion number 1 and motion number 2 designated in 240330. I imagine that Lotus is going to convert motion number 1 from 240330 into motion number 3 here, unless, I suppose my question is, whether one thing that occurs to me off the top of my head is we could pull motions number 1 and number 2 from this docket, kind of administratively remove them from this docket, move over everything from the last docket, and then replace motions number 1 and 2 in this docket with whatever they would fall in terms of recency. They'd be motions number 26 and 27 or whatever. The problem with that, of course, would be that responses to motions number 1 and 2 or responsive, OCC's filing is going to reference motion number 1 and it will actually mean motion number 28 or whatever it is. That's a solution that comes to mind. I don't know if that's workable for everybody.
I have a request from co-counsel. If we could just spend just a few moments talking offline, would that be acceptable to the
Sure.
chairman and the commissioners?
Sure. Yeah.
Thank
Do you
you
want
very
to just, would 5 minutes work?
Yes, please.
Sure.
Thank you,
Okay.
Chairman.
Yep. We can take a 5-minute break. Okay, we are back on the record. Attorney Pace, did you want to give us an response to the question I asked before?
Yes, thank you for the time and the latitude to speak to the parties. And so what we've agreed is, in the letter we filed tomorrow that talks about schedule, we'd also like to talk about if there is any record evidence in 240330 that would not come over. We think it's most efficient to talk offline and communicate that in writing to the authority. The last question that the chairman raised was this issue of where we file interrogatories issued in the old docket, but now we're coming in at this date. And we will work with the case coordinator to find the most efficient approach to avoid getting into those details here in front of the commissioners, if that's acceptable to the chairman and the other commissioners.
Sure, that sounds reasonable. One thing that has come to my attention is the issue of, so this is a docket that was open in 2024. There are motion rulings issued in that docket that don't follow our current process, that are signed by the executive secretary. That docket also had a presiding officer that wasn't voted on according to our current process in the regular calendar. So I just want to get clarification. Is the company willing to waive objections based on those procedural irregularities that have been raised in other dockets in order for us to move particularly the motions? And I guess kind of off the top of my head, there are lots of motion rulings and motions. There are notices of requests for written comment. So there are things other than sort of evidence in the previous docket that it's my understanding the request is to shift all of that over. Just wanted to get clarity on that. And if the company doesn't want to waive, then we could just move we just move interrogatories, responses, the application, the evidence that will be adopted at the hearing. So just wanted to raise that question also.
Yeah, I appreciate the question. What I'd like to do, as an attorney for the company, I'd like to speak with my clients offline and be able to apprise them of the impact of the question that you raised. And we can respond to that in writing, maybe as soon as the letter going in tomorrow, so we can tie that all up in one filing to respond to your question, Chairman.
Okay. Thank you. And so that's going to be contemporaneous with the scheduling update tomorrow, like by end of day tomorrow?
Yes, and so just to summarize, and thank you, the intent for tomorrow's filing would be to reflect agreement or not on the schedule with our respective positions. We'd identify if there's any record evidence now in 240330 that would not be coming over and the reason why.
Okay.
And then responding to the chairman's question about if we waive any concerns with procedural violations and other violations as it relate to motion rulings and other processes in the older docket. We can address all those items in tomorrow's filing.
Okay. And of course, if it's unclear, my question is only as to the other. I wouldn't be asking the company to waive the right to raise any objection to what this commission does in this docket moving forward.
And just to confirm, Attorney Pace, you are going to consult with the other parties on item 2 in terms of things that are to be included or not included in
Yes, that's
in this
correct,
current
Commissioner.
docket.
Correct.
Thank you.
All right. Did anyone else want to be heard on any of this before? Because I'm about to move on to the question of settlement update is like the next and last topic I wanted to cover today. So is everyone ready to move on to that? Okay. So that's I think we had talked about, I think the company had offered, I think, in a filing to provide maybe an update on settlement discussions today. So we're happy to hear if there is an update.
I can start. So I think I had mentioned in some of my opening remarks, we're certainly happy to proceed in both directions here. We've started the process of outreach and had initial discussions and meetings, and I think I mentioned it's certainly far too early to suggest or indicate that that's likely or probable or anything to that extent. But we're, certainly on our end, looking forward to trying to make Vice Chairman Arconti a Baseball Hall of Famer.
Okay. Does anyone else want to? Okay. Hearing no other supplements to that update, I think that's, unless any other party wanted to raise any other issue, that was sort of all that was on our agenda for today. This conference was primarily for scheduling. So are there any other administrative matters or any other issues anyone wants to raise? Attorney Lopez.
Sorry, just briefly, and this is related to the record. Ultimately, I just, and I will talk to the company offline, but based on, there may be a few discovery requests from 240330 that weren't cross-posted yet in 251213 that still may require a response still outstanding. So just making sure that those are either filed in both or just to make sure they're on the record somewhere. And we can talk more about details offline.
Yeah, no objection, very reasonable request, and we'll work with them to make sure it's filed in the appropriate locations.
Okay. So with that, I think that we are ready to adjourn for today. As I said before, we'll wait for an update from all parties with respect to the schedule by the end of the day tomorrow. And then we will do our best to quickly and efficiently come up with a schedule. We'll post that in the docket. That will be the next step, and we'll also lay out next steps, which I expect will largely map the in terms of the actual layout of the docket. I don't disagree personally with Eversource's vision of procedurally the steps that this docket would take. So I expect we'll issue a schedule that reflects those similar kind of pattern of steps with dates that hopefully work for everybody. So thanks everybody for the conversation, and we will, I'm sure, see you soon on this issue. Have a good day.